The Athletics' Keith Law rips the Giants, rips Marco Luciano for the plan of having Luciano as that starting shortstop to begin the year. But I'm going to explain why I wouldn't put too much weight into the words of Keith Law.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, been hosting Locked On Giants for coming up on 5 years, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Check us out there. If you have not already, please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And where we get started is jumping right into these mailbag questions. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions on Twitter. The first one coming from Kevin, who says, did you hear Keith Law's interview on KNBR in which he said the Giants' plan to start Luciano at short is, quote, reckless? Went on to say it is well known throughout MLB that Luciano is not an MLB shortstop and should be moved to the outfield. Thoughts? So I have a lot of thoughts here. Number one is just that my experience with listening to and reading Keith Law has been that I don't trust pretty much anything he says. Like, all due respect, I don't know him personally. I've got nothing against him personally, but some of the stuff that he said has just been absurd to me. And some of the stuff that he's written has just been absurd to me. And yet he's kind of touted as like this prospect expert, but I don't even really know what the background is. I think there's not necessarily like a pro scouting background. It's just kind of like a guy. I honestly don't know, and I don't care to find out because some of this stuff has just been so absurd to me. And I'm gonna give you two examples. The thing that pushed me over the edge, where I was just like, wow, I'm not gonna listen to a thing this guy has to say, or take it seriously at least, was a not too old article in The Athletic in which he said, like, he basically redrafted this draft that yielded Bryce Harper, Manny Machado, Christian Yelich, and a bunch of other really good players. And one of those not necessarily really good players, but a player who was really good defensively in his prime, I mean, the best in the game, Andrelton Simmons. So Law said, I'm going to redraft this draft, knowing what we know now. And he took Andrelton Simmons first overall, ahead of the likes of Bryce Harper and Manny Machado. That, to me, tells me everything you need to know. And the explanation was that he was confident that Andrelton Simmons would have the longest career because his defense would enable him to just keep playing deep into old age, and that he would end up providing the most WAR of anybody. But it's like, first of all, Andrelton Simmons, he's out of the game. Like, a couple years later, he's out of the game. Like, when you can't hit and all you can do is play defense. And by the way, defense does decline faster than hitting because it has everything to do with athleticism and like quickness, and that stuff declines when you start to get on the other side of 30 or so. And guys like Bryce Harper and Manny Machado, like, those guys can still hit for a long time because they're superstars. So just the notion that you would take Simmons ahead of Harper and Machado, and this was not like 8-9 years ago that he said this. This was like 3 years ago. And so that just, I was flabbergasted. I was like, what? what are you talking about? And then another thing, this is not really, I mean, this is just going back and making a point about something that in reality happened, was I vividly remember, and maybe some of you remember this too, prior to the 2010 season, when the Giants picked up like Aubrey Huff and Mark DeRosa, but they were coming off a pretty good 2009 with a lot of young talent coming up, and there already, Sandoval, Lincecum, Kane, etc. Buster Posey in the farm system. And I remember Keith Law was on KNBR, and he was asked about the Giants offseason, and there was like optimism locally, and I think it was Damon Bruce, and they were like, he was like, people here are excited, and like, what do you think of the Giants offseason? And Keith Law went on to say, oh, I think it's terrible. I think that they didn't do enough, and Aubrey Huff is terrible, and terrible defensively, and blah, blah, blah. And I mean, look, he's not wrong. Like, if you look at Aubrey Huff's career, there were problems defensively, and not to mention, personality stuff that we kind of found out later. But, he was so wrong. Like, Aubrey Huff, people don't like him, but it'd be impossible for me to sit here and say that they win the World Series without him. Like, Aubrey Huff had a fantastic season, so he was just dead wrong, but it was also like kind of a miracle, the type of season that Aubrey Huff had. It was like a legitimate MVP type season that Aubrey Huff put together for the Giants, including defensively. He was really good. So I just don't, and plus I have read other scouts, and I have seen with my own eyes, when Luciano was in the big leagues, he looked capable at that position. So the idea that it's like reckless to play him there is, I think, just, I don't know. I just don't buy it. I don't buy that he really knows what he's talking about. All due respect, I guess. I mean, again, this is not a personal attack. I just think that he kind of made a personal attack on the Giants and Marco Luciano. And I don't know, like Fangraphs, I think it was. There have been some, I think it was Fangraphs with their top 100 prospects or top Giants prospects or something, basically said that, or no, I think it was ESPN's Kylie McDaniel, which was that, while it's been believed forever that Luciano will have to move off shortstop, scouts now are saying that he's improved enough that he should be capable there. And Kylie McDaniel of ESPN is way more legit to me as a prospect analyst than Keith Law. And so I don't know. First of all, I did not hear the interview. If I wouldn't care to, I just don't put stock into what Keith Law has to say. So my little thing here on YouTube says Keith Law rips Giants, Luciano. And you could title this segment, Ben Caspick rips Keith Law, about his ability to, I mean, I don't know, where was Keith Law raving? Maybe he did, but raving about Patrick Bailey's defense, for example. Like, these prospect analysts, so many of them, they don't know much, like, it's all kind of, it's not a very exact science, and it's not just Keith Law. Like, Logan Webb was never a top 100 prospect. Nobody saw Camilo Doval coming, like, in being what he became. And Patrick Bailey was, like, universally slept on as, like, oh, he's the best defensive player in baseball. But I didn't see a lot of that when he was on his way up. So anyway, we're going to turn the page in just a minute and get into, like, this outfield, right-handed hitting outfilders when we're talking about Luis Matos, Elliot Ramos, even Austin Slater, and who fits, who doesn't, who deserves a shot, who doesn't, and a lot more about that. So we will get into it in just a minute, and before we do, today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at Backblaze. Data is the digital world's most precious resource, Backblaze has made it their mission to make it easy to store, use, and protect data. They protect all the data on your machines automatically. Backblaze offers multiple restore options, including rapid recovery in the event of data loss or ransomware. Start with a free trial today and then get unlimited cloud backup for Macs, PCs, and businesses for just $99 a year. Go to backblaze.com/lockedonmlb. You can access your backed up data from anywhere in the world using Backblaze's web app or their iOS or Android apps. Few data protection services have the recommendations that Backblaze does. They are recommended by the New York Times, Incorporated Magazine, Macworld, PC World, LifeWire, Tom's Guide, 9 to 5 Mac, Wired, and more. Receive a fully featured, no-risk, free trial at backblaze.com/lockedonmlb. Go there, try it out, start protecting yourself from potential bad times. That's backblaze.com/lockedonmlb. All right, as promised, after I'm done with my Keith Law segment, I really had to get that off my chest because this is not the first time we've had him. Like I said, in 2010, he did the same thing. I vividly remember where I was and my reaction. I was like, oh man, this guy is... That might have been the first time I ever heard of Keith Law. And it was like, this guy is like throwing some cold water on a team that I felt optimistic about. And sure enough, like I failed to kind of mention, that team went on to win the World Series. And so was he right? I mean, I wish we could go back in the archives and listen to what he had to say. He was very pessimistic about the Giants offseason and their chances of doing anything in 2010. So nobody knows a thing. And look, that redraft thing, I mean, seriously, Andrelton Simmons over Harper or Machado and even Yelich? Like, are you kidding me? It doesn't... That doesn't make any sense to me at all. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers, on Monday, we're going to have the latest from spring training as games get underway. We're going to have a couple of spring training games. Your annual reminder that spring training doesn't really matter, and it's just about guys getting in their work. And a lot of these questions coming up are about performance in spring, so I'm going to fold that in to my answers. By the way, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV Channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. So, continuing on with the questions, Daniel says, if Matos has a good spring, would you trade one of Mike Yastrzemski and Conforto and give Luis an everyday corner spot? Don't understand the logic of starting him at Sacramento if he has a good spring, but basically give Luciano shortstop without much competition. And so there's a couple other questions that are related, so I'm going to just mention them now as well. Travis says, are Matos and Ramos going to get a fair shot in spring training? If they outplay Yaz and Conforto, will they start, or will it be like the last few years where they send them back to AAA to prove they belong in the majors and kill momentum a la Bryce Johnson? And then Zach says, our opinion on Elliot Ramos and if he's ready to contribute in the big leagues. Melvin seems to like him. If Slater is limited to start the year, do we see Ramos in his place? So a lot of Ramos and Matos talk here lumped together. Speaking to Daniel's question, if they have a good spring. So I'm just going to like stop it right there and say spring training results don't matter nearly as much as most people think. Like, it just doesn't translate. How you perform in the spring does not translate to how you will perform in the major leagues in real games. Joey Bart, notorious awesome spring hitter. Never has been able to hit in the major leagues. Mike Yastrzemski was horrible in spring. And I got so many questions. There was a lot of concern. There were people saying like, basically, oh, you can't play him because of this. And he got off to one of the hottest starts on the team to start the season. It just does not translate. And so I don't think first of all, a lot of the evaluation is kind of under the hood stuff. It's not like, what's your batting average? They're more so looking at kind of what's your swing decisions, what are your exit velocities and launch angles and stuff like that, and how hard are you hitting the ball, which is exit velocity. So the answer for me is no, though, and it's not just about that you can't evaluate much in spring. I'm just not trading established good major league players in Mike Yastrzemski and Michael Conforto to give Luis Matos an everyday role, especially because I can fit Luis Matos onto the roster without trading either of those guys. And so, in my opinion, have all three instead of, that's a way bigger risk to say, oh, Matos, had a good spring, therefore we're going to get rid of guys who have a very high floor because they have a track record of major league experience and success. I'm not saying Yaz or Conforto are superstars, but Conforto, coming off a down year, was at least average, and Yaz is just consistently a little bit better than average. Also plays a really good defense, which matters and contributes to his value. And so for me, like when Farhan Zaidi said the outfield is kind of set with Conforto in left and Lee in center and Yaz in right, he didn't mention that I think Luis Matos figures to get a shot to, like, I don't know if you're just going to platoon Conforto or not, but, Slater certainly platoons with Yastrzemski. I just think there's room for Slater and Matos on the roster, and that's the point at which you make your evaluations. Like, so I'm not saying put him in a platoon and keep him there for the rest of his life. I'm saying start him off facing lefties for the most part, and then in the course of a game, like when you start and it's a lefty on the mound, and then say you're winning by 5 or you're losing by 5, you don't take him out and do that platoon. So then he faces right-handed pitching. So even in games when you start and you're just facing a lefty, there are plenty of opportunities where you'll face a righty, and that's where you're doing your evaluation. And it's just over the course of 162 games, not only is there that, but guys get injured. Yaz tweaks a hamstring, and then all of a sudden you need Matos to fill in, and then he gets that everyday opportunity, and then you do your evaluation in that situation as opposed to in spring training. So as you can see, since I'm focusing on Luis Matos, I have him significantly higher than I have Elliot Ramos on my depth chart, even though Matos is younger and less experienced. Elliot Ramos, I kind of in the Joey Bart category. I just don't know that there's a lot of faith in him by this front office. And he did show improvement and finally hit well in AAA last season. And so I think that he's in that mix, and he does have a minor league option remaining. And so he's not one of these guys who's like Joey Bart, like there's no minor league options, and so it forces your hand. He either has to be in the big leagues or you have to get rid of him in the big leagues for you, or you have to get rid of him and then he has to be in the big leagues for some other team, or he has to be DFA'd. But Ramos, they can option him again. But I see Matos making the team. If they send him to AAA, it's to give him just everyday playing time, and spots open up. Spots open up. It is a 162 game season. You're talking about guys in Conforto and Yastrzemski who have dealt with injuries in their careers. And so spots open up, and having that depth is very important. And to be able to go to a Luis Matos in the event of one of your other guys. But the thing is, Conforto and Yaz are left-handed. And so, you also, say Conforto is just looking out of whack at the plate. especially against lefties. There's your Matos role, and then again he gets his opportunity to prove himself against righties on occasion, and then that's when you're doing your evaluation. So I don't know. I guess I answered the first question. Didn't speak to Luciano. I do think they need to add competition at the shortstop position. I wouldn't just despite what I was just saying about Keith Law and blah, 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 and the Luciano stuff, I think there should be more competition. And I literally yesterday was talking about, Matt Chapman and the possibility of him being a shortstop option for a year, because JD Davis himself brought it up. So I don't know. The question, are Matos and Ramos going to get a fair shot in spring training? Again, if they outplay Yaz and Conforto, spring training results, I'll just re-emphasize, don't mean anything. Like Yastrzemski he had like one hit in spring training last year. And I mean, it wasn't one, maybe it was two. I mean, he just really, really struggled. And then he got out of the gates as the hottest player on the Giants. And so it just doesn't matter. And it's not a good time to evaluate. And sending guys down like Bryce Johnson, the thing about Bryce Johnson is he was never likely to succeed. He wasn't a top prospect. He's unlikely to have a successful major league career, just being blunt. Whereas when you're talking about Matos, I think this is a guy who held his own in the major leagues as like a 21-year-old last year. So it's a different story, much more highly regarded prospect. And I think the chances of Matos having success are significant, whereas the chances of Bryce Johnson having success in the major leagues are far lower. And so I don't think it was killing momentum. It's just about they didn't believe in him, whereas I think they believe in Matos, and to a lesser extent, like maybe there's not a ton of belief in Elliot Ramos, but I do think he should, like you said, if Slater is hurt to start the year, it does open up a spot in that kind of right-handed outfield mix, and I think you could see Elliot Ramos get some playing time there. And again, it would be kind of facing lefties, but you get your chance when you're facing lefties to start, you get your chances against righties. It just happens. Like it's Bob Melvin. It's not going to be as strict platoon heavy as it was with Kapler. Anyway, more questions and answers coming up. We're going to talk about, do the Giants really need Austin Slater at all? So we'll get to that question, and also a question about this horrible chart that showed the Giants' first round draft pick failures over the last 10 years. Oh my gosh, is it depressing? We'll get into the question about it momentarily, and before we do, today's episode is brought to you by our exceptionally good friends over at FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Like the Warriors shellacked the Lakers last night. If you bet on the Warriors to win, $5, $150 in bonus bets. So coming up later, I'm looking at the NBA kind of lines over on FanDuel right now, and the upcoming Warriors game is against the Charlotte Hornets, and the Warriors are extremely heavy favorites here at -900. So here's your opportunity. The point spread at -13 for the Warriors to cover. So again, go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins if you're a new customer. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, here we go. We're going to get to more questions and answers. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers, we've got baseball to talk about. No, we're not going to be like, oh my gosh, this guy did this in spring training and therefore it's going, like, literally, I hope you really take this to heart. It does not matter. Their record doesn't matter. Performance by individual players doesn't matter. Certain things matter. Like if a pitcher is velocities down 5 miles an hour towards the end of spring, that's cause for concern. I think for pitchers, it's easier to be concerned if they're just, and it has a lot to do with velocity. And for it's just about health, really. Major league track record is so much more relevant than spring training results. So like Yastrzemski, he's got a major league track record. If he goes 0 for 30 in spring training, what matters more, that or his major league track record? It's like 99% major league track record, put 1% of the weight into the 0 for 30 in spring training. It just doesn't matter. So with that said, the next question comes from Alejandrizi, who says, do you think we really need Slater? He's basically a one-trick pony and was horrible in the second half last year. Between Matos, Sable, Fitzgerald, Meckler, and Ramos, he's taking up a valuable roster spot and is a free agent next year. I just think Ramos deserves a fair shot. So to call Slater a one-trick pony is like to call, I don't know what it's like. It's like to call Shohei Ohtani a two-trick pony. It's just like totally undervalues that the thing he does well, he does exceptionally well. He's literally has the highest like OPS all time among pinch hitters with at least 100 pinch hit plate appearances. A lot of that has to do with the fact that he pinch hits against lefties, and he's just so good. So when you're saying he's a one-trick pony, for those who are not sure what that means, he's exceptionally good at hitting left-handed pitching. But it'd be one thing if he was just like he's all right against left-handed pitching. But we're talking one of the best in baseball, if not in terms of pinch hitting, the best. And he's obviously comfortable pinch hitting, but the fact is he's just exceptionally good against left-handed pitching, and he's also pretty good defensively. He's dealt with injuries the last couple years, which he was a capable center fielder, but now that you've got a kind of everyday center fielder in Jung-Hoo Lee and you put Slater more on a corner, as long as he's healthy, he's more than a one-trick pony because he can also play defense. And so, yes, I think that Slater provides a lot of value. To me, he's a guy that is potentially somebody that they should extend. He's the longest tenured Giant. And you're talking Matos, Sable, Fitzgerald, Meckler, and Ramos. None of those guys are proven. And Sable's left-handed. It's kind of a different role. Meckler's left-handed, different role. I do think Matos deserves a shot. I'm less certain about Elliot Ramos, although I'm not against him getting a shot. But again, injuries happen. I think maybe under Melvin, he does get a little bit more of a shot this year. But Slater is one of the most valuable kind of bench players in baseball, I would argue. And so that's my opinion. I have numbers to back it up. If you just say trade Slater and just give that role to Ramos, and then Ramos struggles, like again, Slater has the track record of being elite at what he does. Ramos has no track record of performance in the major leagues. And so it'd be a huge risk to just do that. And so why not stick with the guy who is exceptionally good at what he does? The Giants have had their problems in the last couple of years. Austin Slater, he was bad in the second half. Everybody except Wilmer Flores was bad in the second half. Literally everybody on the hitting side, except for Wilmer Flores, was horrible in the second half. So it wasn't just Slater. Yeah, that's my opinion. Some may disagree, but again, I have numbers to back this one up. Jacob says, any chance you can discuss the war for every team's first-round pick from the last 10 years and how the Giants would be better off having not signed a single first-round pick in that span? Susan Slusser retweeted the chart I'm talking about. So Susan Slusser retweeted the chart you're talking about. I also made a copy because it was definitely must discuss content when I saw this. So I haven't verified. This is Baseball Reference WAR, by the way, which is different than Fangraphs WAR. WAR is not like an objective number like batting average. It's, I guess, even batting average, there's some subjectivity. I mean, with errors, right, being the decision of the official score. But I digress. Yeah, so I haven't verified that this is all correct information, but it's a chart that shows every team's first round picks in the last 10 years and their total Baseball Reference WAR produced. And the Giants are dead last, literally dead last, with minus 0.1 collectively from their first round picks in the last 10 years. The next closest team is the Nationals at 2.2. And so that's like, and then the top player, by the way, the top player is Patrick Bailey at 0.8 Baseball Reference WAR. And I'm just going to point out right here that this is a good example of that. First of all, I think Fangraphs WAR is better, especially for catchers, because they incorporate framing more into their WAR calculation. And Bailey at 2.8, according to Fangraphs. So I don't know if that's really what they have for Bailey is 0.8 over at Baseball Reference. But anyway, I mean, the point stands. Like, no matter how you slice it, the Giants have not had any success, perhaps outside of Bailey. Like, it looks like Bailey may be a cornerstone catcher defensively. People have compared him to Posey. I said no, pump the brakes on that. I kind of see more of a young Yadier Molina when I look at Patrick Bailey. But yeah, so we'll see where Bailey goes. They've also had some really intriguing first-round picks the last couple of years in Bryce Eldridge and Reggie Crawford, both of whom were two-way players, both of whom now are not going to be two-way players. Crawford's going to just pitch. Eldridge is just going to hit. But the Houston Astros are first at 59.5 WAR. San Diego Padres second. It's worth noting that the Padres' top player, it says, is Trey Turner, and he never played a game for the Padres. So you may have drafted him, but you traded him, so that's kind of worse in a way. I don't know. The Padres have a lot of that number is players they traded away, but nonetheless, I mean, this is why they are where they are. They need to have more success with their draft picks, and it doesn't really matter if it's your first round pick. You just need to have a pipeline of talent, and yeah, they've failed miserably with their first round picks in the last decade. But a lot of people were really down on Patrick Bailey. This is what I'm saying about prospect analysis. People are down on Patrick Bailey big time as a pick. And they were like, the initial reaction was like, why did the Giants take a catcher when they already have Joey Bart? Well, it turns out Bart can't play, and Bailey is like the best, arguably, defensive player in baseball. And so, the front office, their evaluations are much better than just kind of the average fan. Some may not believe that, but it's true. Like, they know what they're doing to a large extent, and the pick of Bailey probably had a lot to do with they believed he could be really, really good defensively, and it's a very important position at which to be good defensively. So hopefully, starting with Bailey, the next 10 years is a lot better, but that's a big part of the Giants' issue has been where they are with this. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Every dayers on Monday. We'll be breaking down a couple of spring games, just kind of the latest from spring training, and hopefully Giants get moving and maybe sign one of these Boris 4. I would really, really appreciate that, as the last episode I did would suggest. So thanks again for listening today. Really hope you enjoyed the show, and you are now Locked On Giants.